Good evening. There will be no 21 gun salute tonight. Because we are veterans for peace, we begin with a silent 21 flower salute. We do it to remember not just Americans and not just combatants, but all who have lost their lives in the war. There's so many, they literally cannot be counted, but they number in the hundreds of millions.
Welcome and good evening to the 15th Armistice Day celebration sponsored by Veterans for Peace Chapter 102 and Veterans for Peace across the nation. We are deeply grateful for all the organizations and people who have signed on to be co-sponsors, and we're particularly grateful for Studio Gear, who are here this evening to help us with the technical side of everything. That's been very, very helpful. Thank you. And we are joined by at least 80 people who signed up for the Zoom part of this meeting, and we welcome you as well. We thank Frogwater and Harvey Taylor for their wonderful music, and for Kelly and Clayborn, our speakers this evening. At 11 a.m. on the 11th of November 1918, the Allied powers signed a ceasefire agreement with Germany and France, bringing an end to a war that is now called World War I. And I think some thought the war to end all wars. Later on, President Eisenhower changed the name to Veterans Day. But Veterans for Peace and many others in this nation and world believe that it still should be called Armistice Day, as we celebrate peace, not war. But today we remember all the warriors across the globe and all the citizens who have been injured, who have died, who have given their life in many wars across the world. Especially today, we remember our sisters and brothers who will decide to leave us, as over 20 veterans did today. War is hell. Let us all work and live for peace. I would like to invite you to join me in a special part of our meetings every time we meet. The first thing we do, and that is to remember the purposes of the Veterans for Peace. We as military veterans do hereby affirm our greater responsibility to serve the cause of world peace. To this end, we will work with others, both nationally and internationally. Please join me. To increase public awareness of the causes and costs of war. To restrain our government from intervening overtly and covertly in the internal affairs of other nations. To resist racism and repression in our home communities. To oppose the militarization of law enforcement. To end the arms race and reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear weapons. To seek justice for veterans and victims of war. To abolish war as an instrument of national policy. Thank you again for being here and for working for peace.
Thank you, Bob. Good evening. My name is Paul Moriarty. I'm a member of the Milwaukee Chapter. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to everybody on the webinar who's here, to our fabulous musicians and speakers. We have great ones tonight. It's my honor to be able to introduce them. Our first speaker is Mr. Claiborne Benson. He's the founder, director of the Wisconsin Black Historical Society and Museum. He's a photographer, historian, and National Guard veteran who had a 40-year professional career as a WTMJ TV photojournalist. He produced an award-winning documentary film, Black Communities, a 3-part film on Black housing, migration, settlements, and trade skills in the United States, Wisconsin, and Milwaukee. During the production of this documentary, Benson realized that the history and heritage of African American people in Wisconsin was widely scattered and poorly preserved. That became the catalyst for him to found the museum to preserve and maintain the culture of African American Wisconsinites. Speaking tonight on the blessings and lessons of a military veteran, please welcome Mr. Claiborne Benson.
Good afternoon, everybody. You all look fantastic, and I am honored to be here. I thank you very much. I'm going to talk about African Americans in the state of Wisconsin and those veterans. Much of the early development of Wisconsin occurs in the western part, Cheyenne Valley, Pleasant Ridge, Hillsbury, La Crosse. All of those areas is where the booming, and people, black people too, are going to the western part of the state simply because they think that there's opportunities there. They come there and they think that equality exists, and they do come. And so my next slide would be, and I'm going to go to the next slide, would be Thomas Green. Thomas Green is a veteran, and he is also one of those people who comes from Missouri. As an enslaved person, he saves up $700 and he makes his way to the western part of the state. There is lead, and just like gold in California, there is lead in the western part of the state, and it's profitable. Everybody is making money, but he's a quite intelligent guy with very little education. He enlists in the army. He becomes a sergeant. He eventually ends up in Chicago, but his daughter comes to Milwaukee, and she teaches school in Milwaukee before the turn of the century. Her name is Sarah Green. This picture says free and equal. Blacks live in harmony in the communities outside of B-Town. It's the first and only integrated school system in the state. It's important to the black citizens that their kids get a good education. They liked immigration, and they love their kids learning how to read and write and get a good education, and they did in the western part of the state. Thomas Green not only becomes a very progressive and smart young farmer, he encourages his other friends and neighbors to become farmers. And so the next photograph is a picture of a soldier. He is a member of the 29th F Company. The 29th F Company was active in a number of battles. The most famous of the battles was in the Battle of the Cradle in Virginia. And the next guy is Mr. Stanton. That's Moses Stanton's brother. Moses Stanton is the founder of Chilton. Was Moses Stanton a black man? Yes, he was. The founder of Chilton was a black man. It was first called Stantonville, and they changed their names. Someone doesn't believe me, the library is there, and they have books on the Stantons. And I wanted to share with you my next hero. His name is John Jefferson. He is a grandson of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And he lives in Wisconsin. And he is active under Grant's leadership in Tennessee and in Vicksburg, the siege around Vicksburg. He commands the 8th Wisconsin, and they are on the northeast corner of the siege. And he commands that unit. He wounded twice and is loved and revered by his men. We're going to modern day, and we have a picture of Grant Gordon. Grant Gordon is one of those first people who, again, after World War II, comes home and says, I want to make a difference, and he becomes an educator. Grant Gordon is in the battle of, in the Normandy battle. He goes to France. He's on the ships and he commands his regiment or company. He becomes an educator, and he was in charge of all of the schools in Milwaukee, and all of the principals had to report to him. The next person is another person who in his own mind gave to the community. Lloyd Bobby. Anybody ever heard of Lloyd Bobby before? So thank you. Lloyd Bobby is in the United States Navy in the late 50s. He comes home and he meets Thurgood Marshall. He's a lawyer. He meets Thurgood Marshall and he says that people, municipalities and cities through the North are cheating on Brown versus the Board of Education. Thurgood said, yes, I do agree, somebody's got to take this on. He says, I want to take it on. And he files 2 federal lawsuits, Amos and Armstrong. And over a period of 15, 20 years, they resolve the issue. Of course, I know that the issue is not totally resolved, but he fights that he fought that battle. Intact busing. He saw black kids being brought into school systems, taken to either a separate room or to a trailer park in the back of the school and educated with poor books. And so he wanted to make a difference. And the Supreme Court of the United States gave him the permission to file 2 federal lawsuits, and he did so. Lloyd Bobby is his name, and this is a picture of him walking out of the school board meeting, being disappointed because the school board wanted him to disband their groups and not allow them to work together. And so Lloyd Bobby, a very important veteran, and another veteran who gave. This is Mr. Wynn. Mr. Wynn comes home, and Mr. Wynn says that the way I can make a difference is create a national organization to help veterans, those veterans that are having mental ills, having illnesses of all sorts, and he sets out to do that, and he creates a national organization to assist veterans. This is a picture of Cornish Grace, and Cornish, he was a newspaper person, and he delivered food. African Americans did primarily 3 things. One, they cooked, they drove truck to and took supplies to various units, and they dug ditches for soldiers to be buried. He delivered supplies. And he was a local hero. People liked him, and they still talk about him. Mr. John Gibbons really was the man. And Mayor Meyer hired him as his first African American aide at City Hall. My friend, Michael McGee, I know all of you know Michael McGee. Michael McGee often talks about his Vietnam experience. And he was a rebel too, although in a different way. This is on Martin Luther King Drive. That was his headquarters. Corey was had mental illness and ended up missing and went for a long walk. And the police and the authorities refused to look for him, and his family took the issue to Washington. Now, any veteran missing for whatever reason has a right, and the authorities have a responsibility to seek out and find them and search for him, and that's very important. General Colcroft and Melvin Hall, both of them worked for the Department of Veteran Affairs. Both of them worked hard on solving the issues of veterans. This is my adopted dad. His name is Everett Moore. He served during that period of career, just after the Korean War. But I think it's important. I've been talking about people who have served in the military and came home and really did make a difference in our community in professional ways, got education. My dad went out of his way to make a difference in my life. I was somebody that he insisted on getting a good education. He put the time into me, and I'm tremendously grateful to him. And that comes from the military. During the Vietnam War, people were finding all kinds of ways of not going to war. I clearly saw my name on the wall. I was not going to return if I went to the Vietnam War. Now, I'm ashamed to say that, to tell you the truth. But I had to do something, and so going to the reserves was the outlet for me. I enlisted, and I had to take this test. I took the test, and I was going up to hand it to the sergeant, and the sergeant on the other side of the wall says, "Come over here, turn your paper into me first." So I take the paper to him, and he says, "I know you meant this, I know you meant that, I know you meant that. Why come to the United States Army?" Well, you know, because I was all wrong, but he made it right. So I go to the Army, and I spend my 8 months. I went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. I took the photography classes and finished, and I did well. And I ended up transferring to the 128 Air Refueling Group. That was and so that worked out much better for me. And I was lucky enough to put in 7 years of service to the Army Reserves. I think that the real important piece is that I felt that I had a responsibility, just like everybody else, to serve my country and to do all of the things I needed to do to make sure that this country is safe. And I did that, and I encouraged my son and grandson to do the same thing, as I was encouraged to make a difference in our community. So I want to thank you all for having me, and that's it. Thank you.
It was very educational for me to find out that there was this real push to integrate black soldiers when they came up north, that there were a lot of people in Wisconsin that were working hard to do that. However, when I think about integration of the peace and justice movement in Milwaukee, and I look out at all of these white faces, we got a long way to go. A long way to go. In fact, I hope that Mr. Benson and I can get together and let's talk about what we can do to bring in more people of color to this organization.
Together, we can change the world. Friends, here's the essence of peaceful changes so many of us are working hard for, yearning for, praying for. Inspired by profound Native American traditions, a blessing for all. May the sun bring us energy by day. May the moon softly restore us by night. wash away our worries. May the wind blow new strength into us. Gently through the world, may we know its beauty all the days of our life. May we move gratefully through the world all the days and nights of our life. Be blessed. This is a blessing for all, a blessing for all, a blessing for all.
She co-founded Voices for Creative Nonviolence, a campaign to end U.S. military and economic warfare. A 3-time Nobel Peace Prize nominee, she traveled to Iraq 26 times. She's been in Afghanistan nearly 30 times, and as an invited guest of the Afghan Peace Volunteers, has lived alongside Afghan people in a working-class neighborhood in Kabul. Tonight, she's here with us, speaking to us about imagining a world without war. Please welcome Kathy Keller.
Good evening, and I certainly want to thank the Milwaukee Veterans for Peace for helping us reclaim Armistice Day. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction, and Bill Christopherson for being in touch with me and all of the people who gathered tonight. There is a very, very important audio recording. It actually comes from that time at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 11th day of the 11th month, when finally the relentless explosions and the gunfire stopped. And we can actually hear it, so if you don't mind just to listen for a few minutes to this audio tape that comes from the front at the time when the explosions stopped. So that reclamation is a bird song, the ending of the industrial slaughter that claimed so many lives and created so much destruction. There's a lot to be learned from the people who survived World War I and committed themselves to Armistice Day. And one of the most moving photos from that time shows soldiers from the front who, when they realize that the war has ended, absorb this news in silence. They don't clap, they don't cheer, they sink down exhausted, some of them, and lean against their packs and they lay their weapons down. There's another person whom I learned a great deal from through reading her memoir, Vera Britain, who wrote A Testament of Youth. And Vera Britain was an Oxford student, and as a young woman, that was a pretty big deal in 1915. And Vera herself signed up to be a volunteer nurse. And so that circle of friends were completely transformed by the experience of World War I at the front and the chemical weaponry. Vera survived World War I, but her brother was killed, her fiancé was killed, two of her closest friends, and so lonely and heartbroken. She nevertheless teamed up with another nurse after the war was over, and the two of them traveled to Germany. And there, Vera began to understand the torment of hunger afflicting German civilians and children, and the perils of disease and homelessness. And this, of course, greatly transformed her perception about war. And I think about the idea of stopping and letting the silence allow people to absorb what has happened in a war. It seems such a stark contrast with the United States, as the U.S. has negotiated a troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. It didn't negotiate a peace, but a troop withdrawal. And instead of slowing down and absorbing what the war did in Afghanistan, what it's done to our country, the United States war planners and military leaders have wasted no time trying to build up for another war, a war with China. I really do believe that stories are our number one way to make sense of our reality. So I'd like to spend some time this evening with you telling 3 stories. They happen to be true stories, all related to Afghanistan, and then see how that might perhaps guide our perspective about reclaiming Armistice Day. I have a friend who is the son of a man who was killed by the Taliban in a rural area of Afghanistan called Bamyan. And so his young widowed mother tried hard to put food on the table, to provide warmth for her 5 children, but there was never enough food, and certainly never enough warmth in the wintertime. And so my young friend remembers that one night, the 2 brothers began to fight over one blanket. And in their fear and rage and cold, the fight escalated, and it got to the point where it seemed like one brother was actually going to try to suffocate the other brother with the blanket, and the horrified family members woke up and they pulled the 2 apart from each other. And that has been a very hard memory for that family to hold. On his last day in Kabul, Samaya had quite a long to-do list of tasks, and one involved going to his boss's house to pick up his boss's computer, and another was to get water for his extended family members and his neighbors, because he had a car. And you know, in all of my visits to Afghanistan, I can honestly say I knew one person who actually owned a car. It was kind of a big deal if you had a car in a working class neighborhood of Afghanistan. The Samaya Ahmadi's car was the same as many other cars, a white Toyota Corolla, and drove that car. He dropped off co-workers who needed a lift. He dropped off food for one of the places where they operated a soup kitchen. He picked up the water canisters and carefully placed them in the trunk of his car. They were so proud of the dad that when he would come home, all the kids would come out and surround the car, and then Zamari would let one of the older boys park the car. So he pulls in, the kids come out. And they thought that he wasn't picking up water canisters, he was picking up explosives, and that he was part of a plan to make a new attack that could threaten U.S. soldiers and other Afghans. This was 3 days after the terrible attack at the Karzai airport. And so the decision was made that that car had to be attacked. And even though a child appeared on the screen for 2 minutes prior to the attack, the order was given and a Predator drone fired a Hellfire missile. And when one of those missiles lands on a car, it lands 100 pounds of molten lead. Denham Leverett Hill worked as an analyst for the Air Force, and he worked very often to try to get intelligence, signals intelligence, underground intelligence, about who the people might be that should be targets of drone attacks because they might be considered threats to the United States or enemies of the United States. And over the course of his years of work, both as an Air Force analyst and then with a military contracting company, he became very troubled in his own conscience because he realized that again and again and again, the persons that were being attacked were innocent civilians. And part of the realization of this came from a document that he could read that was produced by the United States government during a 5-month program called Operation Haymaker in Afghanistan, when the United States government concluded that 90% of the time they hit the wrong target. A civilian, an innocent civilian, was killed. And so then, Hale began to feel like he had a responsibility to share this information. So he did. He shared it with Wisconsin's own Jeremy Scahill. Jeremy wrote a report called The Drone Hebrews for a website called The Intercept. And then the United States government came after Daniel Hale. And he now is sentenced to 4 years in prison. He's serving those years in a very difficult place called the Marion Penitentiary. But this is what he said to the judge when he was at his trial. He said, "I'm guilty of stealing those papers because I could no longer steal what was not mine to take, the lives of innocent people." And so, really what is unusual about the killing of the Ahmadi family is that there was coverage. The drone programs we already have are just a software upgrade away from becoming autonomous weapons, which can make attacks without any human control whatsoever. So this should be a source of great alarm for us. But instead, the United States Pentagon, without being willing to free up the money that should be paid as reparations, particularly to the people who've become displaced or refugees. Many of them are now in this country. The Pentagon has plenty of money to cover the expenses of those people, but they want to shift those expenses to houses of worship, to communities, to people who would become volunteer social workers. And that way, those people, I think, will become so overwhelmed with their responsibilities to care for new refugees, they won't be able to make the political protests that must be made to stop the Pentagon from starting a new war. And so I am so grateful to all of the people in Wisconsin and Veterans for Peace who've gone out to Vote Field and protested the drones. I'm grateful to all of the people that are protesting against the installation of F-35s at Truax Field. I'm so grateful to the people that draw attention to the Navy shipyard in Marinette, Wisconsin that's going to possibly create the 50 new ships that the Navy claims it wants. This is from Bill Hartung, writing for the Cost of War project at the Watson Institute. He writes, the China threat argument has been utilized to justify the quest for a 350-ship Navy, up from about 300 ships, and that's Marinette getting ready to make 50 new ships. Major Air Force purchases like a new bomber and the F-35 combat aircraft, major expenditures on missile defense systems, and large new investments in cyber technologies and tactics, offensive and defensive, unmanned systems, hypersonic weapons, and artificial intelligence. The China card has become the argument of choice to consolidate political support for these expenditures. So we ought not to be bamboozled into thinking that we must begin a new war. I believe instead we should slow down, lay down our weapons, and then take a cue from Vera Britain and look to understand the people who are our so-called enemies, and then be grateful for the title she gave her book, A Testament of Youth. And hear the testament of our young people today in the Sunrise Movement, in the Black Lives Matter movement, in the Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions movement. Our young people who are saying to us, We want to live. Let us follow them, and let us hear the words of an oldster. You've heard it now. Leonard Cohen in his song anthem, he crooned, "Ring the bell that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And so let the light shine on everything the Veterans for Peace have done and will do to bring about a world where it's easier to be good and where we finally abolish war." Thank you.
I'd like to conclude tonight with a short excerpt from an article by the Indian journalist and novelist Arundhati Roy. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world, and ready to fight for it. Thank you for joining us today.